Hi, welcome to the Connected Caroline Show. Today, I have a very special guest, my friend and fellow restaurateur, Ed Lee. And let me just tell you a little bit about Ed. Ed is the co-founder and partner of Wahoo's Fish Tacos and is responsible for the expansion and development of what has become one of the United States' most well-loved brands, fast casual restaurants in the country. And he co-founded it with his brothers Wing Lam and Mingo Lee, and they've established Wahoo's as a pop culture mainstay in California and beyond. Welcome to the show, Ed.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Ed also has other restaurants, coffee. He has Our House Coffee Shop, nightclub, Schroff Clothing.
Oh no, those are the things I started before. Ron wanted to let people know I don't not just Wahoo's, but I've done other things in my life.
Right, like he's a serial entrepreneur and mentors lots of people, and also is opening a second restaurant under the brand Toast. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Correct.
Well, congratulations. That'll be great.
Thank you.
People are lucky out there for your opening for sure. We're not going to be talking to Ed today about Wahoo's or his restaurant career, his entrepreneurial career. We're talking to Ed about something very, very personal to him. And I thank you, Ed, for coming on the show and talking about your new book and your journey that you have unfortunately had to experience over the past, has it been year and a half? How long has it been now?
So it's crazy, but it's almost been 6 years now. My whole mental stat just shut down. I shut down, didn't tell anyone. So if you only known me for the last 6 years, you have not really talked to me a lot in the last 6 years. You wouldn't have known. That's why this book is blowing people's mind, because as people are reaching out, they're completely like, whoa,
They didn't know. So I guess I found out, it must have been pre-COVID in 19. I guess you had just started talking about it because that's only, few years, 4 years ago, I guess. What is that? 2.5 years ago.
Yeah.
I'm so off. I want to read what's written in the Amazon information, because I think it's really beautifully written, and it will give the listeners and viewers a background on what's going on here. Okay, so his new book is called After, Learning How to Live After the Death of a Child. And tragically, Ed and his wife, Mimi, and family lost their son, their cousin, their nephew. And so we're talking about this because it needs to be spoken about. And the point of view of the book, which I think is really going to be extremely helpful, is from a father's point of view, a male point of view. And sometimes, that's the biggest struggle, is to be able to communicate. Like you said, it took you 6 years to talk about it. So hopefully this will help other dads and men deal with the grief, any kind of grief, right? So let me read this real quick. This is a vulnerable retelling of the tragic death of a son and a father's journey to integrate this heart-wrenching loss into his life. Through this relatable story, you will discover universal themes that are relevant to all kinds of grief, not just the loss of a child. Along the way, you will gain insight into what it looks like to learn how to live after a devastating loss and compassionately care for those who are grieving. Amidst the pain and sorrow of the loss of his son, Lee is forced to discover what moving forward looks like. He is open and honest about his experience, sharing his struggles and what he has found to be helpful. This is not a story he's ever wanted to tell, but knowing how difficult of a journey it has been, he presses past his resistance to talk about these things, hoping it will help others who have experienced similar losses. And I know this is a tough thing to talk about, but I just applaud your bravery and vulnerability to share with my listeners and everyone watching your story. So you could start where you want to start.
Well, thank you. So the reason why I wrote this is, I went through a lot of counseling, and one of the things was reading books about grieving. but all the books I read, very helpful, but they weren't talking about the journey that you would have to go through grieving. They just told you the processes of the grieving, anger, the most, all the common things you hear, denial, anger, and you go through all that. But they weren't really describing what anger felt like. So I felt lost, like I didn't know exactly. So as I was writing the notes as I'm being counseled, I belong to 3 different groups to walk you through it. I kept thinking to myself, this is very helpful, but it really doesn't describe what we're sharing with one another. Like when you get into this group, you're sharing with other grieving parents. So I decided to write this mostly because the first meeting, they said there's going to be about, anywhere between 10 and 15 people. And they said it would be males and females talking about the loss of a child. And my counselor convinced me to go to it. Zoom into it. I was the only male. I was shocked. There was no other father willing and to talk. So we, got to hear a lot of moms and their emotions. And I'm not trying to, separate men and women, how they do things, but they were all willing to share their pain and agony. It was so surprising. And yet I couldn't even talk for weeks of these meetings. So that's kind of prompted the thought of it. And then Ron said, hey, we took notes all these years. You just got to put it on paper if you want to. And so I started diddly-dallying with it a little bit. And as I wrote it, I realized that this is what's been missing out there. No one's really, if you read it, it is all my emotions, from the day that happened to now still, the struggles of that, living with it for the rest of my life.
Oh, gosh, I was going to bring Kleenex. This is going to be a tough one. So what are the things that surprised you when you started to get in touch with those feelings? Did it bring up other things that you had been stuffing down all these years?
Yeah. So there's a thing it's called a timeline that you should do of your life, right? But you should do it. I highly recommend people to do this, but with a professional counselor.
Yeah.
Don't do it with family and friends, because it can get you to a dark place. You start going back to zero to where you are now and really thinking clearly, how did I get here? And that timeline put me in places where I didn't grieve my older brother passing very well. And I just kicked the can down the road, and I thought that it was all fine because, I was busy with work, busy raising a family, and I didn't really grieve that well. And that all came tumbling down. And right now I'm still struggling, not only about my older brother, a son, but also one of my closest friends in life has passed away a year and a half, 2 years, almost 2 years ago now. And so you just like, how much more can you possibly do? That's why I advise people, you need someone. The main purpose of this book is that you got to find the Rons of the world that help you navigate your life. You think you can do this on your own. You think you can do it a family friend, but it doesn't work that way. It really doesn't. So for me, that timeline, almost, it's so depressing to do a timeline if you have problems, issues.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason why you don't sink into complete depression is because you do have help that's saying, no, don't worry, the next steps are these, just deep breaths, self-caring, all the things that you have to do but with a professional person that walks you through the thing. It was amazing to do the timeline. I was very thankful for the group of men that helped me get through that. So super important for anyone to find out who they are is to go do a timeline on their own.
I can relate. I can relate completely from my own journeys and stories and situations. And it's the only community that understands what you've been through, and professional help And this, because you can self-care and do yoga and spinning and Pilates and take walks and meditate. And sometimes it's not enough. And I can speak from my own personal experience. I've had a couple of times that it wasn't enough. I needed a community. So I have a question. In terms of the family dynamic, as the dad, like, what are the places where you felt so vulnerable and out of control that you have a little bit of peace now that you've done some work?
So in the beginning, I think I'm not going to put all men in that same group, but you're mostly stuck in the denial zone of life. And then you get busy, trying to stay busy and denying the whole thing is happening. So the biggest step for me, I'm not a counselor whatsoever, but for me it was, unfortunately, I started drinking quite a bit. So through the drinking, if it wasn't for that wake up call I had, I think I probably might not be here. But that changed the way I wanted to move forward. And that was, and people ask me about whether I was suicidal myself. I was never suicidal, but you're tired, super tired of life, meaning like you just can't, you don't want to get up. You're semi-depressed every day and you're fighting yourself constantly. My wife did a much better job. She had a group of females, moms that worked with her, talked to her, versus I didn't have that. I mean, not to judge my friends, but men don't get together and cry and talk about things. And, oh, hey, I'm having a bad day. Can somebody,
Right.
It's not like that. And I'm not, so a lot of my friends and even my family that read the book are feeling, shocked that I didn't ask for their help. And it's not their fault. I didn't ask for help. So they're all shocked about as they're reading and finding out that. So the one thing I for sure know is alcohol, drugs are not going to fix anything whatsoever. That one just kicks that can way further, and the damage that it causes is sometimes not, not fixable at all. So those are the things I've learned from the day that happened is, I had to start working. Unfortunately, it took me 3 years to get to that point where I needed to find help. And I went and sought help. And the first thing I needed to do is actually fix the drinking problem. So I wasn't even going through the grieving process. I was just trying to, survive and stop drinking. And even that was, everybody's like, oh, man, isn't that, you think it's easy, but without some mentoring, it's not as easy either for me. I was so shocked that I just thought I could just click and stop drinking. It turned out it took me about 3 to 4 months to even get some money and still continue checking in and working this. For now, I'm going to have to work for this in the rest of my life, I think. So there's lots of things that goes on unfortunately, through your mind. But men, I think, unfortunately, try to fix those things on their own. And that's where we get in trouble.
Yeah, I have to say, I'm back to the men are from Mars, women are from Venus. It's true. As an entrepreneur myself, and I get it. Like you've got a lot of balls, a lot of plates to hold up in the air. You certainly do, with all the businesses that you've got, going, and the stuff that you've got coming down the pike, and family, that parental responsibility. I can relate to everything you're saying. And, I'm not a dad, but I was curious as to if you've had time to reflect, on your experience versus like your wife's experience. And I mean, you've answered that. And, all of growth really does take a community that understands. So, you probably said to your family, like I really just needed to be with people that understand, that have been through this. It's impossible to know unless you've been in your shoes, right? I mean, that's sort of what I feel. I have a couple of girlfriends who have lost their sons, and if they don't reach out for help and get into a community of like people that have experienced the same thing, it's tragic. Because the drinking and the drugs and the depression, all those things, you just can't handle these things. What a human being needs help, that's my belief. anyway, this is your interview. I mean, but you're really touching me with like, I mean, I really can relate to a lot of what you're saying. We're of such a certain age that there's a lot of life we've lived, and a lot of things that I think people in our age group have, you have just moved on quickly, because I mean, I know you as a very social and a very, like happy go lucky, you're so friendly, and, but all of us have these, shadow sides and these dark places. And if you don't uncover them, I think it's a disservice to your experience in your lifetime.
For
I
sure.
believe that,
I think, like when you keep asking like a little bit of like how men are different than women about this is that we didn't share this. We don't talk to people about our grieving, or, we're not, supposed to cry. And those are the things like, it's sad that we grew up feeling that way and not being able to share. My wife, Michelle, Mimi, had an amazing team of females, even though they have never grieved for a son. They also all of them experience some kind of grief. As unfortunately we get older, grief is going to be part of our lives. It's going to be, the sad thing is, parents, siblings, friends. you know uh, right now I'm still trying to deal with losing someone that helped me get through so much part of my life, and now she's not here to hear me go through this. I think that's what probably made it harder, because she was not there to help me grieve my son, because she was dealing with her own issues. And so the one person that you rely, that's not your wife, to be one of your closest friends, to sit there and talk about things. That's a female, by the way. Females listen and they don't judge you, by the way. They don't like, oh, are you crying, really? Versus they just listen. They listen and they comfort you. Um, you know, and I didn't have that. So Michelle did. People rallied around her,
Yeah.
and I think that is super, super helpful. That's why for men is for me is, it makes it easier when it's a counselor. And Ron happens to be a friend of mine from college, a retired
Why don't
pastor.
you explain who Ron is so the audience knows?
So Ron is the co-author. He's actually the writer, pretty much. He put my voice into that book, and he's an amazing friend. We met in college. So I reached out to him because I knew he wasn't going to sit there and blow me off. As a retired pastor, he would walk me through it, and he's not necessarily a grieving counselor. So he guided me. He was more of a guide to whether it was alcohol or the things that were around me, kind of giving me the check-in every Friday. And then when he never pushed me really hard, but when I was ready to go into counseling at D.D. Hirsch, which only handles suicide survivors. So that he was the one that got me to that road. But so he was just there to literally listen, make sure that I was not drinking hard, making sure that I was doing self-care, like be careful. And even the process of walking through D.D. Hirsch and the men's group I belong to still, I've always checked in with Ron saying, hey, here is where I'm at, just in case. And that's why when we wrote the book, it was really easy because he was journeying with me the whole time. So it's almost like, I'm not saying somebody should go find a counselor right away, but somebody that will listen to them, that not necessarily is going to push them around or kind of roll their eyes at their problems. Like, that's why I think Ron, finding a Ron for your life is important.
Yeah.
And Ron has his own organizations called Rooted Soul Ministries, and he just listens to people and then helps them with books, other materials. Got me to D.D. Hirsch, advised me on getting in a men's group. So these are the things I think men they just don't want to be involved and actually share. And but from my experience now, after going through all this, is it took me 3 to 4 weeks just to even open my mouth in the group setting. Every week you do the check-in, you're like, oh, I did okay, and just let everybody else talk.
So in hindsight, I mean, you spoke a little bit about that just a minute ago, but in hindsight, what would you, for anybody listening, what would your like recommendation, for lack of a better word, be that you would do differently? Obviously, would it be starting sooner on, on your recovery in every way?
In every possible way, but
Yeah.
it's not easy to do. And I get it. I honestly do get it, because the fact that even doesn't matter if it's a year, 2 years in your path, you're still different. Everything is different. I keep getting reminded it's not a competition. It's not about getting put. You're never gonna finish this race anyway. So you're not competing with everybody else. So people you just need to start working on it as fast as you possibly can. But we have problems with that. Whether you're male or female, everything's within your time. The only thing for sure, 100%, with no doubt in my mind, is I would never tell somebody you need the counseling ASAP. Well, you do need it, but get in, your path, start walking it, and see where you're at. Check in with someone, but for sure, 1,000% don't drink. It is not healthy, and all that does is hides every single emotion you have. Just gets buried aside, whether it's anger, anything that's going through. It's just so that's the only thing I truly advise people is don't. If you want to have a social drink, obviously go ahead, but don't drink when you're sad or feeling a little depressed, because that's just the wrong road to take.
I know that.
Yeah, I know.
I do. I lost my mom this year, and we were very close, and I'm alcohol free, and I drank over it, and it was stupid. I know better, but it just makes everything worse. It does.
It does. But at the moment, it makes everything great, because you're not thinking about anything.
Well, you just numb out.
You numb, and you I think I'm not 100% sure, but I probably cleared over 500 bottles of wine in 1 year sitting, and that's so more than one a day.
Yeah, and that's tough on the marriage. It's tough on everything. It's tough on your brain just is not functioning. Your poor body's trying to get into homeostasis and never can. Right?
It's a battle. That's why that's the one. That's why it's like when somebody asks me for my advice, just don't drink. Just don't drink. Don't do it. Stay away from it as best you can until you're ready. Then go back and find counseling. But again, in your own time. Everybody has you can't force somebody to start this path. They just get on it, and they're wherever they're at that time is where they need to be.
Yeah, it takes as long as it takes, right?
It does. And
it's it is a lifetime. It is, it's not something that, you can put a bow on it and say, okay, we're done with that. So it's never.
Grieving is forever.
Clearly, as a parent, that's a whole nother level. It's an expectation. Everyone goes at some point, but the situation for you is completely, unimaginable, and the worst, as they say, the worst nightmare of a parent.
Yeah,
absolutely. And unfortunately, it's something, especially young men, suicide rates are extremely high. And that's why I wanted to talk about it, because we have to talk about it. I talk about it with my sons. They're teenage boys, and going to college and what that's like, and the loneliness, and, and they've got, one of them has issues around depression and anxiety, and it's not something to be afraid of. It's something to just to walk the path and get be as curious and educated as you can be. I think around managing it is, and having the kids manage it, and not talking about it, because that's the thing. Men, I get it. Men just don't talk about stuff like women, it's like totally different, right?
Totally.
But there's cultural things that people have as why they don't share their dirty laundry. So, you know, I hear that from friends. That's not something that Armenian people are like. We talk
Yeah.
about everything, but you know, there are certain things that, you know, you just don't let outside that family and that kind of mentality. I hope that's gone away. I hope that's like fading away, and transparency and being honest. The way to get through something is to talk about it, right? To
Yeah.
share and to hear other people's stories that can understand what you're going through, right? That's how you manage it. It never goes away, but it's how you learn to not feel like you're alone in this world,
Right.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, I had the double whammy, and I always thought that was weird, but it didn't affect me. I was fighting my own battles myself because, you know, in our culture, the Asian culture, we would never talk about any, you know, Emilio was in a weird category because he had no signs of mental illness whatsoever. So this is why I was so surprised. I mean, we
Mm.
were caught so unprepared. He's never, I mean, everything that they found about when he was writing about the week before, it was about planning his future, planning his vacation time. He already had plans to go on a short trip for Christmas break. So there was nothing that gave us a signal about this. But with the Asian cultures, like when I talked to my mom and I explained to him what he did, and she was shocked. And she doesn't
Mhm.
talk to people of anything, you know. She will never. My mom and dad won't talk to anybody about what happened, and but I've never had that pressure as a, you know, and I don't know why I not had that pressure. I don't feel it's embarrassing. He did what he did, and that's, you know, I don't know what else to say except he decided at one spur of the moment and to do something that he was, you know, that he regret, and we will regret it for the rest of our lives.
Mhm.
But I think it was just that one moment. I now belong in a group, so we talk to other family members, and there are other families just like us that spur of the moment, no signs whatsoever,
Mhm.
they end their lives, and you're like, what in the world are these kids? So even if you prepare the best you can, there are going to be cases like Emilio where we have no idea why it happened. We're baffled. Um, so that's why that first year or two was more like denial. You know, it's like, why? You know, this is not possible. But
Yeah, I understand. I mean, I understand because one of my girlfriends, her son was in that category. There's no signs at all.
none.
Happy, happy, happy kid.
I know all the pictures we have, all the things all the things we read. You know, the police has to have, which made it hard for us for the first 6 months. I think that's why the kicking around of it is when a child commits suicide, you actually don't get a chance to grieve right away because you're dealing with finding out the details of it.
Mhm.
And the police was very involved. The first thing they did the following day, they came and took his phone and they took his computer, and then they start interviewing people around us to see if there was anything that might have been caused by us.
Yeah,
And
right. They have to do their due diligance
do.
around all that kind of stuff. Sure.
So you
That's
feel
so it's
guilt, you know, like, oh my gosh, I mean, are they kidding me? Are they think, and it takes a little while to kind of take a step back and take a deep breath and, you know, just understand that they're just doing their job. They're there to find out what happened.
Mhm.
And then, so 6 months into it, talking to his friends, talking to counselors in school, they found out, I mean, you know, Emilio was straight A's, but it was not because we forced him to be straight A's or, I mean,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
he just did it on his own. We never, you know, when I always like to giggle because even the counselor goes, yeah, he goes, Ed is not a typical Asian father. He's
Right. You're
reserved.
just super cool.
I was like, well, yeah, I always expected the kids to do well at school, but if they got to be, they got to be. It was not gonna. There's no beatings at home at all. Because
Yeah.
I barely finished college myself, so the expectation was just finish college someday in your life, and that's good enough for me. But anyway, it ends, and then that's the beginning of sort of your grieving process. Is when you
Yeah.
go to the police station, they give everything back to you, and they say,
Hmm.
"I'm so sorry. He's at 1 percentile." And I goes, "What is that?" He goes, "Well, we have no idea why this happened.
Oh,
We have
God.
zero idea. I'm so sorry. So you were thinking that you're going to go to the police station and grab everything, all his belongings, and there will be an answer for what happened, and there was none. So then you'd be like, this sucks. And in the
Yeah.
beginning of, all kinds of things start going through your mind. You have no answer. And it's a never ending process. And then you go through the 2 years of that. And then now you're going where there's, and, family and friends, and I love them all to death. Oh, are you okay?
Yeah.
The ones that are trying desperately they don't know what to say to you. They don't know how to comfort you. And so it makes it even harder for people um, to help you. It's really hard. But I think my thing in life is now I understand that this is going to be the way I am forever. And I
Yeah.
have to choose all the things I have to choose is I have to choose to live and live for myself. Nothing around me is going to bring me happiness. If you're not happy with yourself, nothing's going to bring happiness. But then, you can look forward and say, I can't wait until Beto gets married. If if he got married, had a great grandchild for me, that will bring me a lot of happiness, but I cannot count on that for making me happy. And then, you and I are going to grieve again. Someone else is going to go. So, God forbid. I mean, if we're hitting that age, I'm knocking on 60 pretty soon. And
Same here. I think we're the
like,
same age.
yeah, so
Exactly.
like knocking on that freaks me out. So we're going to grieve again. So that's
Yeah.
why I was getting upset when the counselor said, I'm so sorry, Ed, I don't think you understand this process. I cannot fix you. And you're like, what? He goes, I'm just showing you how to live with this. That's it. I'm like, I wasted my whole year. I thought I was going to finish this thing. It's like, oh no, sorry about that. You misunderstood.
Yeah, it's not project managing.
No.
I mean, right? We're such
No.
project manager types, and we,
like, oh
yeah.
my gosh. So then you're like,
Yeah.
okay, now I'm in another group. And then you got to go to another group. And then you
Yeah.
can take a break and find out, okay, now I know I have all the tools in front of me, but I do check-ins. I still go, do self-care. I do all the things that I'm programmed to do for myself. If
Good.
I'm feeling a little overwhelmed, I take some time off. I try to go surf, but that's, try to just do things to keep calm, not to kick the bucket, but just to stay calm.
I get it.
Yeah. So like for me, as soon as I feel a little depressed, two things I do is I go and have quiet time. Just
Mhm.
have quiet time and try to read. I know that read calms my heart down. And if I just read, it keeps me calm. And then when I'm feeling a little depressed, no alcohol that day.
Yeah.
So we put away everything and just stay in a little room and read a little bit. And usually after about an hour and a half, you kind of, you're not fixed, but you're like, okay, tomorrow's going to be a new day. And you move on to, okay, got to eat dinner, got to see what the wife is doing. And that's the other problem, right? Because you're grieving, you're a little bit emotional, but just because you are doesn't mean the rest of the world is going to really care. They're not going to give you the space. Your cell phone still rings, thinking, "Hey, pick up the phone."
Yeah.
So
Yeah, you have to
is,
draw boundaries. You really need strong boundaries for your own self-preservation, right?
So you got to
Yeah.
have time to yourself, but yet that phone's going to ring. So you kind of have to have a balance. It's like you can't shut down the world around
Right.
you thinking that's going to work. So you go, but you take that hour and a half, get a little bit of hot chocolate. I always giggle because people are like, you're drinking hot chocolate. It's 100 degrees outside. But I love hot chocolate. I love hot chocolate, calms me down, makes me think of fun things with Emilio. So I said, no, I'm going to drink a hot chocolate, and that's what I do. Hot chocolate, read a little bit of book, and got to get back on that bike because life doesn't stop around you. It's so crazy, but life doesn't stop. So you got to keep moving.
Well, I mean, that's the whole get into solution, right? You have these tools, that's the term used, to calm your parasympathetic nerve, right? I
Yeah,
do
absolutely.
breathing, I have, everybody, and everybody's different. Because if
Absolutely.
I hear journal more, I'm like, that doesn't do it for me. Readings for you. I sit and breathe. Everybody's different. And that's what I
Absolutely.
want everyone to understand. So you got to find what works for you. There's no one size fits all on any of this stuff.
Yeah. It's
Right?
just tools. They teach you tools that what's going to calm you down, and that's about it. And again, it's like, for the rest of our lives, we're going to be grieving. We're going to grieve again. I mean, it
Yeah.
sucks. I mean, now that after all this, I'm like, I literally used other words with a counselor. I'm like, what the frick? I mean, this isn't, are you kidding me? It's like, yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah. My mom used to say getting older sucks.
Sucks big time. Totally sucks big time.
Yeah.
And now I have the other crazy thing about grieving too with other parents is it sucks that there are that many other parents around me.
And that's what I mean.
Shocked.
That's what I know. And that's when I read your Facebook post, which is when I discovered you'd written a book, and I immediately reached out to you because it is epidemic. It is of epidemic portions.
It is
proportions, not portions. Sorry, pardon the pun. And it as is the fentanyl deaths of,
oh my gosh,
teens. I actually have a documentary filmmaker friend who I interviewed, on D. Tmoner, and she has a documentary of the interview. I don't remember exactly which episode it is. I'll put it in the notes. She did a whole thing on fentanyl and opioid. It's called the opioid epidemic.
Correct.
So there's a lot of epidemics, but teen suicide, and especially in boys and teen to young 20s is another one. So
And they said this thing is going to help men that are grieving, whether it's not a loss, just a loss of a son. Any grieving, they'll feel that emotions that you're going through. And that's what I hope everybody gets out of this book, is that they can. There is help, and you're not fixable. You're just just get your tools, and you got to make that first step. Take that big first step and find a Ron of the worlds that can help you navigate. To give you the tools you're going to need for the rest of your lives. Because if not, the one thing that stuck in my mind after going through the year of counseling was 90% of all marriages fail after a loss of a child. And so you got to fight it. You got to fight, stay married. You got to want all these things. If you don't, that, it's fine. Everybody's got to do what they have to do. But I think that's one of the major things is. And the reason why now in my mind is why marriages fails, because you're grieving in different spaces, and you're looking at your wife and goes, oh my gosh, she doesn't understand me. She's not grieving where I'm grieving. I can give you tons of examples, but I don't, but it's just like you're just not there. Like Michelle was able to tell people right away. I couldn't tell anyone until the last 6 months. And now, by the way, I'm forced to have to tell people because they're reading the book and they're like, oh my God, but I don't want to tell people that. I mean, it's like we would go to dinner parties. And they would ask, how many kids do you have? They say 1, and he's in college, blah, 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 and push on to the next question. And then 10 minutes later, the same couple come back and goes, oh, I'm so sorry for your loss. Because they would run into Michelle at a different part of and I'm like, what is that crazy lady doing? Now I feel like I'm a liar. And she goes, oh, I'm there. And then now you're having this weird conversation with not strangers, but people that are just acquaintances, business acquaintances, and they explain to them you lost your son. And then, and they didn't mean anything by it, but they also go, oh, how did it happen? You're like, oh my God, I'm having to explain it. That anger inside was like, I gotta get out of here, you know.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
explaining something that's very, very deep, personal, just me, and my wife is telling the world about the pain, but she's okay with it. These are the like, and then I now that I belong to this other group, I see the differences between what they're doing and with their wife not accepting. I'm like, you guys are a bunch of ding dongs. You can't do that. Your wife is grieving differently than you are. You know
Wait,
that, and
yeah,
just you
good.
can't force her to be in the same. I go, she's in the same path. And again, remember what we said, it's not a race. So she's ahead of you. So I'm so sorry that you're behind, but you got to work on this. And everybody said, oh, I keep forgetting that. And then the anger goes away. I think if not, that's why marriages fail, because it is, men can't seem to stop and understand it's not a race. Your
Mm.
wife might be ahead of you. She might be behind you. She doesn't need your help necessarily to catch up or to help her, move along. It's weird that it's one of those things that men maybe try to fix their wives. Hey, move on, move, let's go. Or it doesn't work that way. And by the way,
Mhm.
that took me a year and a half to figure that out. Everything takes so long to figure out with this grieving craziness.
You're giving people the cliff notes. You know, you're giving them like,
Yeah.
but at least it's like transparent. There just
Yeah.
isn't a place for men to like learn this stuff. And if you can't afford therapy, think of the people that can't afford to get into therapy. So at least they have a manual out there, the book called After, that that they can pick up for, not a lot of money and
There's a
get
lot
help.
of, right. So there's a lot of resources in the back of the book, because those other books are helpful too, as much as, but those books are talking about the guidelines you need, the tools you're going to need in each stage of grieving. But, my book explains the emotions that are attached to each of those processes. A little bit different, but it's all there in the book.
Well, I haven't gotten my book yet in the mail, but I'm going to read it as soon as I get it, and I will share it with my friends
you.
as well. Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
I hope everybody checks out Ed Lee's new book, After. You'll have all the information in the notes section. And Ed, again, thank you so much for coming on and pouring your heart out here. And I really, really appreciate it. And I know that the listeners and viewers will really appreciate it too.
Thank you.
It's really, really helpful. You're doing a great service as a honor to your son, helping other dads and men. So I will see you soon, I hope, in person.
That'd be nice.
And yes, until next time, this is Caroline with the Connected Caroline Show. Make it a giving day.